Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum combined for 83 points on 61 shots in Friday's loss to the Cleveland Cavaliers, but Brown believes the duo should have taken on even more offensive responsibility given the context of the game, writes Adam Himmelsbach of the Boston Globe. With the Celtics missing Kristaps Porzingis and Jrue Holiday due to injuries, the team's offense was limited, leaving Brown and Tatum as the primary scoring options. The point raised by Brown about the Cavaliers' strategy is quite relevant. The opposing defense's decision not to double-team either star shows tactical respect for the Celtics' passing abilities, but also suggests confidence that both players could tire out or make mistakes if forced to carry the entire offensive load. Brown acknowledged that, in the face of this approach, the duo's obligation was to be even more aggressive. "They don't want to help," Brown said. "They were trying to take away our spacing and our shots, so they were just staying home instead of trying to make us make reads and passes. That means we have to dominate every time down the floor. I feel like I let them off the hook maybe a few times where I could have used some shot fakes. A few possessions I'd definitely like to have back, but for the most part, we were aggressive, and that was key for us." Brown's analysis not only demonstrates his maturity as a player, but also highlights how the balance between offense and tactical reading can be decisive in tightly contested games. His comment about using more fakes to break down the defense suggests that, even with 83 combined points, the Celtics still had room to exploit the game more effectively. This self-criticism is something that separates elite players and shows how the team's winning mentality continues to evolve. On the other hand, the high shot volume pointed out by Himmelsbach could be a concerning issue. Tatum's 37 field goal attempts, a new career high in regulation games, likely contributed to his poor three-point shooting in the second half, where he missed all 4 of his attempts. This stat raises an interesting debate. To what extent can excessive offensive responsibility harm a star player's efficiency? It's true that in situations like this, with key players sidelined, the best players need to take on the spotlight. However, modern basketball demands greater balance, and relying solely on contested shots can wear down even the most talented players. The absence of Porzingis and Holiday not only limited the rotation, but also underscored the importance of having multiple offensive options to ease the burden on Brown and Tatum. The Cavaliers' approach of sticking to individual defense was a risky strategy that ultimately proved effective, even with the duo scoring 83 points. It exposes a possible weakness in the Celtics: the need for a consistent third offensive options to maintain offensive fluidity when the stars are overloaded. The Cavs had a clear strategy: target Sam Hauser on defense. For much of the game, Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland sought direct matchups against the Celtics forward, testing his physical limits and reaction time. The plan seemed spot on. Cleveland made 12 of 26 field goal attempts when Hauser was the primary defender, a rate that at first glance might suggest vulnerability. But does that narrative really tell the whole story? The decision to attack Hauser was no coincidence. Despite being primarily known for his three-point shooting efficiency, the number 30 has been quietly earning respect on the defensive end, something that often goes unnoticed by those who only look at raw numbers. Joe Mazzulla made it clear in his comments. Hauser has been a great defender in this league for the last 2 or 3 years and has earned a reputation for it. But that statement raises an important question. If Hauser is indeed such a consistent defender, why is there's still a widespread perception that he's the weak link in the system? The answer might lie in how players like Hauser are labeled in the NBA. Historically, sharpshooters, especially those who weren't high draft picks or don't possess standout athletic profiles, are automatically classified as easy defensive targets. But this lazy narrative ignores how much Hauser has evolved in recent seasons. He may not have the lateral quickness of Jrue Holiday or the physical strength of Jaylen Brown, but he makes up for it with positioning, tactical discipline, and relentless effort. The real question here is, what matters more on defense? The ability to completely deny shot attempts, or the resilience to force opponents into contested shots, even if they occasionally make tough ones? Hauser fits into the second, category. Many of the baskets he gave up didn't come from glaring mistakes, but because Mitchell and Garland are simply talented players capable of hitting difficult shots. If that were the standard to disqualify a defender, almost no one in the league would pass the test. Moreover, the fact that the Cavs consistently attacked Hauser could even be interpreted as an indirect compliment to the rest of the Celtics' defense. When you have Jrue Holiday, Jaylen Brown, and Derek White on the perimeter, the options for mismatches become limited, and Hauser ends up being the most accessible path. Not necessarily because he's a weak point, but because the others are even more formidable. The controversial angle that few are discussing is, how effective is this approach of hunting Hauser, or is it just a statistical illusion? If the Cavs' game plan revolved around exploiting Hauser and they still lost, wouldn't that be a sign that the strategy ultimately failed? Perhaps the Celtics would prefer opponents to target Hauser, knowing he'll hold up just enough not to compromise the system. The narrative of Hauser being an easy target no longer holds up as it once did. What no one expected was that, despite being consistently challenged, he'd finish the game with positive praise from his own coach. This opens up a broader reflection. Is the NBA still underestimating players who build their careers on discipline and effort rather than athletic highlights? The Boston Celtics might face an extra challenge in their upcoming matchup against the Denver Nuggets, as two key rotation players, Kristaps Porzingis and Jrue Holiday, are listed as doubtful for the game. The information, reported by Brian Robb of MassLive, raises concerns about the potential impact these absences could have in a game that promises to push the team's physical and tactical limits. Porzingis, sidelined due to a non-COVID illness, has been a crucial piece for both the Celtics' offensive and defensive schemes. His ability to protect the rim and stretch the floor is a rare asset in the league, especially against a team like the Nuggets, who rely heavily on Nikola Jokic dominating the paint. The Latvian's absence could force Joe Mazzulla to lean on Al Horford for extended minutes, which at this stage of the season presents a difficult dilemma. How much can the Celtics afford to push Horford physically without jeopardizing his effectiveness? For the playoffs? Meanwhile, Jrue Holiday's situation is even more concerning. The veteran guard suffered a mallet finger injury on his right hand during Wednesday's game, a setback that could limit both his defensive presence and offensive playmaking. Holiday is the anchor of the Celtics' perimeter defense, and without him, the team could struggle to contain Jamal Murray, one of the league's deadliest players in pick-and-roll situations. This raises a critical question. Is it worth risking Holiday's health in a regular season game, considering Boston's relatively secure position at the top of the standings? Adding to the uncertainty, Jaylen Brown is also listed as questionable with right knee soreness. The wear and tear on the All-Star forward is becoming a growing concern, especially after a stretch of games where he's carried a significant offensive load. The trio of Tatum, Brown, and Holiday has been the backbone of the team throughout the season, and this situation sparks an uncomfortable discussion. Is Boston becoming too reliant on its stars to sustain its success? On the flip side, these potential absences could create opportunities for players like Neemias Queta, Xavier Tillman, and Jordan Walsh to earn valuable minutes. Queta, in particular, has shown intriguing flashes as a rim protector, but remains unproven against elite offenses like Denver's. Tillman, the recent trade acquisition, might get his first real chance to make an impression, while Walsh continues to fight for a spot in the rotation. This kind of scenario also puts Mazzulla in a tricky spot. Should he prioritize the long-term health of his stars or push for wins to lock up the top seed in the East? The load management debate has been a hot topic surrounding the Celtics since last season, and this stretch could test the patience of a fan base that often demands a better balance between short-term ambition and long-term vision. What would be the smarter move? Play it safe or make a statement against the defending champions, even at the cost of wearing down key players before the playoffs? One of the few disappointments for the Boston Celtics over the past 2 years has been the failure of their developmental prospects to earn consistent rotation minutes, a point highlighted by Brian Robb in his recent column. While the franchise has solidified itself as one of the NBA's powerhouses, this seemingly minor issue could turn into a much bigger problem than many realize. With the roster becoming increasingly expensive, the need for young contributors on affordable contracts is turning into a crucial piece for the team's long-term sustainability. Jordan Walsh, Jrue Peterson, Baylor Scheierman, and J.D. Davison represent the Celtics' investment in young talent, but so far, none of them have managed to carve out a consistent role. The question few are asking is the problem with player development or with the team's own philosophy? The Celtics' recent history shows a clear preference for experienced veterans, a strategy that maximizes immediate success, but may also be stifling the growth of promising talent. Take Jordan Walsh, for example. He was viewed as a prospect with high defensive upside, but his lack of playing time is preventing him from making mistakes and learning on the fly. Meanwhile, J.D. Davison has shown flashes of talent with the Maine Celtics, but the gap between the G League and the NBA remains too wide for him to be a short-term option. As for Baylor Scheierman, known for his perimeter shooting, he appears stuck in limbo, somewhere between a promising shooter and a player still too raw for the league's standards. The central question is, how sustainable is this strategy? With Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown locked into supermax contracts, and Jrue Holiday, Derek White, and Kristaps Porzingis also on hefty salaries, the Celtics need cheap contributors to maintain their roster balance. This is the blueprint teams like the Miami Heat and Denver Nuggets have followed successfully, developing low-cost role players who complement their stars without breaking the salary cap. On the other hand, the issue might not be solely on player development, but on Joe Mazzulla's mindset. The young head coach has leaned heavily on veteran stability, trusting players like Sam Hauser and Al Horford while keeping the younger prospects as emergency options. But could this conservative approach be hurting the team's long-term depth? Another underrated controversy is whether the lack of young player development is simply a consequence of the Celtics' obsession with immediate titles. The franchise is clearly in win-now mode, but will that urgency come back to haunt them in the coming years when the roster ages and the salary cap skyrockets? There's no denying the Celtics have built one of the most talented and deepest rosters in the NBA, but the delicate balance between experience and youth is what defines dynasties. If players like Walsh, Davison, and Scheierman don't start contributing now, Boston could fall into a cycle of constantly needing expensive veterans to plug holes, a model that rarely sustains long-term success. Perhaps the biggest question is, are the Celtics sacrificing their own player development in pursuit of immediate perfection? Or are these prospects simply not talented enough to survive in the NBA?